Sarah Martinez entered the Navy training mess hall, carrying her food and looking for a vacant spot. At 25, she appeared younger than most new enlistees. Her small build and calm manner made her seem a bit out of place among the louder, bigger recruits. She'd been on base for only 3 days, but could already sense people's curious stares tracking her. The dining area hummed with typical evening chatter. Trainees gathered at tables, swapping tales of home, why they joined the Navy, and what they hoped for. Sarah chose a table in the corner, eating her food deliberately while watching everything unfold. She had learned long ago that observing and listening often revealed more than talking. At a nearby table, 10 male trainees were engrossed in a lively discussion about the next day's physical exercises. They were the kind of group that naturally drew attention. Tall, muscular, and self-assured. Their apparent leader was Jake Morrison, a former college football player from Texas. He never missed a chance to boast about his athletic feats. His voice carried across the room as he described his weightlifting records and running speeds. "I'm telling you guys, these Navy fitness standards are nothing compared to what we did in college sports," Jake bragged, flexing his large arm muscles. "I bet half the people here won't last through the first month of real training." His friends agreed, their own confidence boosted by being associated with Jake's bluster. They had quickly formed a close group, supporting each other's belief that they were better than other recruits. Sarah noticed them glancing around, sizing up potential rivals with dismissive looks. "Look at her over there," whispered Tom Chen, nodding toward Sarah's table. "She looks like she belongs in a library, not on a naval base. What do you think she weighs?" "Maybe 110 pounds, dripping wet." The group chuckled, though not loud enough for Sarah to clearly hear. She kept eating, appearing focused on her meal, but fully aware of their attention. Years of preparation had taught her to always be alert, even in seemingly safe places like a dining hall. Jake's gaze lingered on Sarah longer than the others. Something about her bothered him, though he couldn't pinpoint what it was. Maybe it was the way she carried herself to composed, to calm for someone who should be worried about the upcoming challenges. Most new recruits were either overly talkative, trying to make friends, or clearly anxious about what was ahead. Sarah was neither. "She's probably here because of some diversity program," Jake quietly told his group. "You know how it is these days. They have to meet quotas." This assumption was both rude and wrong, but it mirrored the kind of thinking that had followed Sarah throughout her military path. People saw what they expected to see. A small woman who must have gotten where she was through luck or special favors, never through exceptional talent and hard work. As Sarah finished her meal, she overheard parts of their conversation. They were talking about the next day's obstacle course training, making bets about who would finish first and who would struggle. The obstacle course was designed to test not just physical strength, but also problem-solving skills, endurance, and mental toughness. It was exactly the kind of trial that separated those who belonged from those who didn't. She stood to clear her tray, moving with the efficient, precise actions that had become second nature. Every step was deliberate, every motion controlled, but to a casual observer, she simply looked like a quiet young woman cleaning up after dinner as she walked past Jake's table. One of his friends, Marcus Williams, decided to test his opinion of her. "Hey there," he called out, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "You seem a little worried about tomorrow's training. Are you sure you're ready for military life?" Sarah paused, turning to face the group with a neutral look. Her dark eyes met Marcus's gaze steadily, showing neither anger nor fear. "I think I'll manage," she replied simply, her voice calm and steady. "Managing isn't really enough out there," Jake cut in, standing to his full 6'3" height. "This isn't summer camp. People's lives depend on everyone being able to carry their own weight." The surrounding tables had fallen silent. Feeling the tension rise, Sarah remained perfectly still, her posture relaxed, yet somehow watchful. Those who knew what to look for might have recognized the stance of someone ready for anything. But to most observers, she simply looked small and fragile next to Jake's imposing presence. "I appreciate your concern," Sarah said, her tone still polite, but with an edge that showed she wasn't intimidated. "But I didn't come here to make friends or to prove anything to anyone except myself." Jake's friends exchanged glances, surprised by her composure. Most people, especially smaller ones, would have either given up immediately or become defensive and angry. Sarah didn't either. She simply stood there, radiating a quiet self-assurance that somehow made Jake feel he needed to push harder to get the reaction he wanted. "Well, we'll see tomorrow how that attitude works out for you," Jake said, his voice carrying a subtle threat. "The obstacle course has a way of separating the fakers from the real deal." Sarah nodded slightly as if acknowledging a simple statement of fact rather than a challenge. "Yes, it does," she agreed. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the group staring after her with a mix of confusion and annoyance. As she left the dining hall, Sarah thought about the encounter. It was nothing she hadn't experienced before. The assumptions, the casual dismissal, the need some people felt to show dominance through intimidation. She had learned long ago the best response was usually no response at all. Tomorrow's training would speak louder than any words she could offer tonight. Behind her, Jake's group returned to their conversation. But the mood had shifted slightly. There was something about the woman that didn't match their expectations, and it left them feeling unsettled in a way they couldn't quite explain. The next morning began with the harsh sound of reveille echoing across the base at 5 a.m. Sarah was already awake. Having kept her habit of rising before the official wake-up call, she quickly put on the standard physical training uniform and headed to the obstacle course. Arriving early to survey the challenges ahead, the course covered nearly 2 acres of carefully designed land. It featured rope climbs, wall scaling sections, mud crawls, balance beams, and a series of increasingly difficult physical tests that would challenge every part of a recruit's abilities. Sarah walked the perimeter quietly, her trained eye automatically calculating angles, distances, and best approaches for each obstacle. Other recruits began to arrive in small groups, most looking anxious about the day. The obstacle course had a reputation for humbling overconfident recruits and revealing the true character of those who faced it. Sarah noticed that Jake's group arrived together, their loud confidence from the previous evening still present despite the early hour. Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez appeared at exactly 5:30, his experienced face showing no emotion as he looked at the assembled recruits. He was a 20-year Navy veteran whose reputation for toughness was matched only by his reputation for fairness. He had seen thousands of recruits come and go. He had developed an almost supernatural ability to predict who would succeed and who would fail. "Listen up, recruits," Rodriguez barked, his voice carrying clearly across the group. "Today's exercise isn't just about physical fitness. It's about solving problems under pressure, helping your teammates, and proving you have what it takes to serve your country. The course record is 12 minutes and 37 seconds, set by a Marine last year who thought he was hot stuff." He paused, his eyes scanning the faces before him. "You'll run the course individually, but I want you to remember that in real situations, you're only as strong as your weakest link. Anyone who puts personal glory ahead of team success doesn't belong in my Navy." Sarah took in the instructions while noting the reactions around her. Some recruits looked determined, others appeared nervous, and a few seemed to be rethinking their career choices. Jake's group kept their confident demeanor, though she noticed several of them stealing glances in her direction. "Martinez," Rodriguez called out suddenly, "you're up first." The announcement surprised everyone, including Sarah. It was unusual for instructors to call on specific individuals rather than asking for volunteers or following alphabetical order. She suspected that Rodriguez had heard about the previous evening's encounter and was deliberately putting her in the spotlight. Sarah stepped forward without hesitation, walking to the starting line with the same calm composure she had shown in the mess hall. Behind her, she could hear Jake whispering to his friends. Probably predicting her performance, she blocked out the noise and focused on the course ahead. The first obstacle was a 6-foot wall that most recruits approached with a running start, hoping to use momentum to scale it quickly. Sarah studied it for a moment, then began her approach. Instead of the expected sprint, she moved with measured steps, building speed gradually. When she reached the wall, She placed her hands precisely and vaulted over it with smooth, effortless skill. The rope climb came next, a 20-foot vertical challenge that tested upper body strength and technique. Sarah gripped the rope and began climbing with fluid, efficient movements. Her technique was perfect. She used her legs to clamp the rope while pulling with her arms, saving energy while moving steadily upward. She reached the top in seconds, touched the marker, and descended with controlled speed. Rodriguez watched with growing interest. The young woman's movements were too precise, too efficient to be those of a typical recruit. She climbed that rope like someone who had done it thousands of times before, under much tougher conditions than a training exercise. The balance beam section required recruits to cross a series of narrow beams while carrying a 40-pound pack. Most stumbled at least once, and many fell off completely. Sarah shouldered the pack and moved across the beams as if she were walking on solid ground, her balance perfect despite the added weight. Jake's confidence began to falter as he watched her performance. This wasn't what he had expected from the quiet woman who had seemed so out of place the night before. She moved through each obstacle with a kind of precision that came from extensive training and real-world experience. The mud crawl featured a low net stretched over a 100-yard section of thick, cold mud. Recruits had to stay on their bellies and pull themselves forward using only their arms and legs. It was designed to be miserable and exhausting. Sarah entered the mud without hesitation. Her movements were efficient and steady. She emerged on the other side looking tired but far from defeated. Other recruits watched in growing amazement as Sarah tackled each subsequent obstacle with the same calm capability. The tire run, the cargo net climb, the simulated building breach. She handled each challenge as if it were routine training rather than a grueling test. Rodriguez found himself timing her performance with growing anticipation. Her form was textbook perfect, but more than that. She showed the kind of mental toughness and tactical thinking that separated exceptional operators from ordinary soldiers. The way she approached each obstacle suggested someone who had faced real dangers and learned from them. As Sarah approached the final obstacle, a complex combination of rope swings, wall climbs, and precision jumps, Rodriguez realized that something extraordinary was about to happen. The current record had stood for 8 months, set by a Marine who had trained specifically for obstacle course competitions. Sarah attacked the final section with the same careful precision she had shown throughout the course. Her rope swing was perfect, covering maximum distance with minimal effort. She scaled the final wall in seconds and made the precision jumps look effortless. As she crossed the finish line, Rodriguez clicked his stopwatch and stared at the display in disbelief. 11 minutes and 43 seconds. She had shattered the course record by nearly a full minute. The silence that followed was profound. Every recruit on the field stood frozen, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Jake's mouth hung open in shock, his earlier bravado completely gone. The quiet woman he had dismissed as a quota hire had just delivered a performance that redefined what they thought was possible. Rodriguez approached Sarah as she caught her breath, his expression carefully neutral despite his inner amazement. "Outstanding work, Martinez," he said simply. "Report to my office after evening chow." Sarah nodded and walked back toward the group of waiting recruits. As she passed Jake's cluster of friends, the silence was deafening. The assumptions and casual dismissals of the previous evening suddenly seemed foolish and small-minded. But Rodriguez wasn't finished with his lesson. "Morrison," he called out, "you're up next. Let's see if that college football training translates to real-world performance." Jake approached the starting line with significantly less confidence than he had shown an hour earlier. Sarah's performance had shaken him more than he cared to admit, and now all eyes were on him to prove that his boastful claims had substance. He tried to shake off his nervousness and focus on the course ahead. But the image of Sarah moving through the obstacles with machine-like precision kept replaying in his mind. The first wall proved immediately humbling. Where Sarah had vaulted over with fluid grace, Jake had to scramble and struggle, finally hauling himself over with more effort than he wanted to admit. His technique on the rope climb was solid but unrefined. burning unnecessary energy as he powered his way to the top through sheer strength rather than skill. Rodriguez watched Jake's performance with clinical detachment, making mental notes about technique, efficiency, and problem-solving approaches. Jake was clearly athletic and determined, but his movements lacked the professional polish that Sarah had displayed. He was a talented amateur, competing against what appeared to be a seasoned professional. By the time Jake reached the mud crawl, sweat was streaming down his face despite the cool morning air. The 40-pound pack felt heavier than it should have. His breathing was becoming labored. He pushed through with determination, but his time was already well behind Sarah's pace. The other recruits watched Jake struggle with a mixture of sympathy and fascination. Many had expected him to easily outperform the quiet woman who had seemed so out of place among them. Instead, they were witnessing a humbling reminder that appearances could be deceiving, and that true competence often came in unexpected packages. Jake finished the course in a respectable but unremarkable 14 minutes and 18 seconds. He bent over with his hands on his knees, breathing heavily and trying to process what had just happened. He was in excellent physical condition, had trained extensively for this moment, and yet he had been thoroughly outclassed by someone he had dismissed without a second thought. Rodriguez called out the remaining recruits one by one, but none came close to challenging Sarah's record-breaking performance. Most finished in times ranging from 15 to 20 minutes, with several failing to complete the course at all. Each performance only served to highlight just how extraordinary Sarah's run had been. As the morning training session concluded, small groups of recruits gathered, discussing what they had witnessed. The conversation centered almost entirely on Sarah's performance and the obvious questions it raised. How had someone who looked so ordinary delivered such an exceptional performance? What kind of background and training had prepared her for this level of competence? Tom Chen, one of Jake's friends, was the first to voice what many were thinking. There's no way that was her first time on an obstacle course like that. She moved like someone who's been doing this stuff for years. Marcus Williams nodded in agreement. Did you see how she handled that rope climb? I've never seen technique that clean outside of military demonstration videos. In that balance beam section, ... she made it look like she was walking on a sidewalk. Jake remained quiet, still processing his own performance and trying to reconcile his preconceptions with the reality he had just witnessed. Part of him wanted to dismiss Sarah's achievement, to find some explanation that would preserve his own sense of superiority. But the evidence was too overwhelming to ignore. Sarah, meanwhile, had returned to her quarters to clean up and prepare for the day's academic sessions. She was aware of the buzz her performance had created, but she had expected it. Breaking course records tended to attract attention, and attention was something she had learned to manage. Carefully throughout her career, the academic portion of the day focused on naval history, protocol, and basic seamanship skills. Sarah participated actively, but without calling unnecessary attention to herself. She answered questions when called upon, showing a solid understanding of the material. But she didn't volunteer additional information that might reveal the depth of her knowledge and experience. During lunch, the speculation about Sarah's background intensified. Recruits who had barely noticed her before were now studying her every move, looking for clues about her past. Some theorized that she was a transfer from another branch of the military. Others suggested she might be a civilian athlete with specialized training. Jake found himself watching Sarah more carefully than the others, trying to understand the mystery she presented. There was something about her bearing, her efficient movements, and her calm confidence that reminded him of his uncle, a retired Army Ranger who had served in multiple combat deployments. The similarity was subtle, but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. Rodriguez spent his lunch break reviewing Sarah's file in his office. Her official record showed a standard civilian background with no prior military service. She had excellent physical fitness scores from her entry examination, but nothing that would predict the level of performance she had demonstrated that morning. The disconnect between her paperwork and her capabilities was significant enough to warrant further investigation. That afternoon's training focused on water survival skills in the base swimming pool. Once again, Sarah's performance stood out from the group. Her swimming technique was perfect, her underwater endurance exceptional, and her confidence in the water absolute. She moved through the water like someone who had spent countless hours in aquatic environments, far more challenging than a controlled pool setting. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Every physical challenge revealed new depths to Sarah's capabilities, each one suggesting a level of training and experience that went far beyond what her official background indicated. Rodriguez made a mental note to make some discreet inquiries about her real identity and background as the day's training concluded. Jake made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of retreating with his friends to nurse his wounded pride, he approached Sarah as she prepared to leave the pool area. "That was impressive work today," he said, his tone much more respectful than it had been the previous evening. "I owe you an apology for last night. I made some assumptions that were way off base." Sarah studied him for a moment, evaluating his sincerity. "People see what they expect to see," she replied neutrally. "It's human nature, maybe," Jake said. "But that doesn't make it right. I've been thinking about your performance on that obstacle course, and I can't figure out how someone with no military background could move like that. Where did you learn those techniques?" The question was direct and deserved a response, but Sarah had to be careful about how much she revealed. "I've always been athletic," she said simply. "Rock climbing, martial arts, that kind of thing. You pick up techniques along the way." It was a deflection rather than an answer, and Jake recognized it as such. But he also recognized that Sarah wasn't obligated to share her personal history with someone who had treated her poorly just 24 hours earlier. "Fair enough," he said. "I just wanted you to know that you've got my respect. Whatever your background is, you've earned your place here." Sarah nodded acknowledgement of his words, but her expression remained guarded. Trust was something that had to be earned over time, not granted based on a single conversation. She had learned that lesson in environments far more dangerous than a naval training facility. As evening approached, the questions and speculation about Sarah's true identity continued to circulate among the recruits. Some of the theories were getting closer to the truth, though none had yet hit upon the reality of her situation. The mystery of Sarah Martinez was becoming the most intriguing puzzle at the training facility, and everyone seemed determined to solve it. 3 days after the obstacle course incident, tensions at the training facility had reached a new level, Sarah's continued. Exceptional performance in every physical and tactical exercise had created 2 distinct groups among the recruits. Some, like Jake, had developed a grudging respect for her abilities and were genuinely curious about her background. Others, however, felt threatened by her competence and began to view her success as somehow diminishing their own prospects. The leader of this second group was Derek Hamilton, a former amateur boxer from Chicago who had arrived at the facility expecting to dominate the physical training components. Derek's ego had taken a severe beating as he watched Sarah outperform him in every measurable category. Unlike Jake, who had shown the maturity to acknowledge his mistakes, Derek responded to his wounded pride with increasing hostility. "There's something not right about this whole situation," Derek complained to his growing circle of supporters during evening free time. "Nobody just shows up and performs like that without serious military background. She's either lying about her past, or she's some kind of plant put, here to make the rest of us look bad. It's conspiracy." Theories found fertile ground among recruits who were struggling with their own training challenges. It was easier to believe that Sarah was somehow cheating or receiving special treatment than to accept that they had simply encountered someone whose capabilities far exceeded their own. The situation came to a head during hand-to-hand combat training. The exercise was designed to teach basic defensive techniques and build confidence in physical confrontations. Recruits were paired up for controlled sparring sessions under close instructor supervision. With emphasis on proper technique rather than aggressive competition, Derek saw an opportunity to prove his theory about Sarah. When Chief Rodriguez announced the pairings for the afternoon session, instead of waiting for his assigned partner, Derek stepped forward and publicly challenged Sarah to demonstrate her abilities against someone with real fighting experience. I think we'd all like to see how those mysterious skills work against someone who actually knows what they're doing, Derek announced loudly enough for the entire group to hear. Unless, of course, you're only good at running obstacle courses. The challenge was crude and inappropriate. But it put Sarah in a difficult position. Declining would fuel speculation about her reluctance to face real competition, while accepting would risk revealing more about her capabilities than she intended. Rodriguez should have shut down the improper challenge immediately. But he was curious enough about Sarah's background to allow the situation to develop. Sarah evaluated her options quickly. Derek was clearly trying to provoke her into a reaction that would either expose her true abilities or humiliate her in front of the group. Either outcome would be problematic, but backing down would create its own set of problems for her future at the facility. If Chief Rodriguez approves the pairing, I have no objection, Sarah said calmly, her tone giving no indication of concern or eagerness. Rodriguez studied both recruits for a moment, recognizing the undercurrents of tension and competition that were driving the confrontation. In his experience, these situations usually resolve themselves once reality replaced speculation. Approved, he said. Standard rules apply. This is training, not a grudge match. Derek grinned confidently as he moved to the center of the training mat. At 6 feet tall and 200 pounds of solid muscle, he had a significant size and strength advantage over Sarah's more compact frame. His boxing background had given him confidence in his ability to handle himself in physical confrontations, and he expected to quickly demonstrate that Sarah's previous successes had been flukes or the result of specialized training that wouldn't translate to real combat. Sarah approached the center of the mat with the same calm composure she brought to every challenge. Her movement was efficient and purposeful, showing no signs of nervousness or anticipation. She took her position and waited for Rodriguez's signal to begin. Remember, this is controlled sparring, Rodriguez emphasized. I want to see proper technique and defensive skills. Anyone who gets carried away will be running laps until midnight. Derek nodded impatiently, clearly eager to begin. Sarah simply maintained her ready position, her dark eyes focused and alert. The other recruits formed a circle around the mat, their own training forgotten as they prepared to witness what promised to be a revealing encounter. Begin, Rodriguez commanded. Derek immediately moved forward aggressively, throwing a quick jab. Intended to test Sarah's reflexes and defensive capabilities, he expected her to back away or throw up a clumsy guard. Giving him the opportunity to demonstrate his superior technique and experience, instead, Sarah slipped the punch with minimal movement, allowing it to pass harmlessly past her head. While positioning herself for a counterattack, her response was a controlled open hand strike toward Derek's solar plexus, pulled just short of contact to avoid causing injury. Derek's eyes widened in surprise. The defensive move had been perfectly executed, and the counterattack would have been devastating if delivered at full power. This wasn't the awkward response of an amateur learning basic techniques. It was the reaction of someone with extensive combat training. He reset quickly and tried a more complex combination, mixing high and low attacks designed to overwhelm an inexperienced opponent. Sarah responded by demonstrating defensive techniques that shouldn't have been in any recruit's repertoire. She redirected his strikes with minimal effort, maintained perfect balance and positioning, and created openings for counterattacks that would have ended the confrontation in a real fight. The watching recruits began to murmur among themselves as they realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Sarah wasn't just defending herself competently. She was displaying a level of martial arts expertise that suggested years of professional training. Derek became increasingly frustrated as his attacks were neutralized with apparent ease. His boxing skills, which had always been his source of confidence, seemed inadequate against someone who fought with a completely different level of sophistication. He began to push harder, his controlled sparring deteriorating into something more aggressive. Rodriguez watched with growing concern as Derek's technique became sloppier and his attacks more forceful. The exercise was supposed to be about learning and practice, not about proving dominance through escalation. He was about to call a halt when Derek made a critical mistake. Frustrated by his inability to land a meaningful strike, Derek abandoned proper technique entirely and lunged forward with a wild haymaker punch intended to overwhelm Sarah through sheer force. It was exactly the kind of desperate, undisciplined attack that experienced fighters learn to exploit. Sarah's response was instantaneous and professional. She stepped inside Derek's extended arm, used his own momentum against him, and executed a perfect hip throw that sent him tumbling across the mat. The technique was flawless. Derek hit the ground hard but safely, his wind knocked out. But no serious injury sustained. The training area fell completely silent. What the recruits had just witnessed went far beyond anything that should have been possible for someone with Sarah's supposed background. The throw had been executed with the precision and timing of a martial arts expert, requiring years of training to master properly. Derek lay on the mat, staring up at the ceiling and trying to process what had just happened to him. One moment, he had been launching what he thought was an overwhelming attack, and the next, he was flat on his back, wondering how he had gotten there. The speed and efficiency of Sarah's counter had been humbling in the most complete way possible. Rodriguez stepped forward to check on Derek, but his eyes remained fixed on Sarah. The young woman who had supposedly arrived at the facility with no military background had just demonstrated combat skills that belonged in advanced special operations training. Not basic recruit instruction? Excellent defensive technique, Martinez, Rodriguez said carefully. Where exactly did you learn to execute throws like that? Sarah helped Derek to his feet before answering, showing concern for his well-being despite his hostile intentions. I studied martial arts for several years, she replied, using the same deflective response she had given Jake earlier in the week, but this time the explanation wasn't sufficient. The technique they had just witnessed required more than casual martial arts study. It required the kind of intensive professional training that was only available in military special operations programs. That evening, Chief Rodriguez sat in his office long after normal duty hours. Sarah's personnel file spread across his desk alongside several other documents he had requested from various Navy databases. The more he investigated, the more puzzling the situation became. Her official records painted the picture of a completely ordinary civilian with no military background. But her demonstrated capabilities suggested someone with years of advanced military training. Rodriguez had spent 20 years in the Navy, including deployments with special operations units. He had worked alongside SEALs, Rangers, and other elite operators, and he recognized their particular brand of competence when he saw it. Sarah moved, fought, and carried herself like someone from that world. But according to every official record, she had never served a day in the military before arriving at his facility. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in several months. The call was answered on the second ring by a gruff voice that belonged to Master Chief Tom Sullivan, Rodriguez's former commanding officer and current liaison to Naval Special Warfare Command. Tom, it's Rodriguez down at Great Lakes. I need to run something by you that's got me scratching my head. Go ahead, Chief. What's keeping you up at night? Rodriguez described Sarah's performances over the past week, emphasizing the specific techniques and capabilities that had caught his attention. He was careful to present only the facts, avoiding speculation about what they might mean. Sullivan listened without interruption until Rodriguez finished his account. Then there was a long pause before he responded. You said the name was Martinez. Sarah Martinez. That's right. Does that ring any bells? Another pause. Longer this time. I can't discuss specifics over an unsecured line, but I think you might want to have a face-to-face conversation with your mysterious recruit. And Chief, be very careful how you handle this situation. There might be more going on than you realize. The call ended, leaving Rodriguez with more questions than answers. Sullivan's cryptic response suggested that Sarah's identity was known at higher levels of the Navy hierarchy, but that information was being kept secret for reasons he could only guess at. Meanwhile, in the recruit barracks, the aftermath of the day's sparring session continued to generate intense discussion. Derek had recovered his composure, but remained shaken by how easily he had been defeated. The other recruits were divided between those who viewed Sarah with newfound respect, those who were convinced that something irregular was happening. Jake found himself in the unusual position of defending someone he had initially dismissed. Look, I know it's hard to accept, but maybe we just encountered someone who's a lot more capable than we expected. There are civilian martial arts programs that teach military-style techniques. Bull, Derek replied, his voice still rough from having the wind knocked out of him. I've been around fighting my whole life, And what I saw today wasn't something you learn at the local dojo. That was professional-level combat training, the kind they don't teach civilians. Tom Chen, who had remained mostly quiet during the discussion, spoke up with a theory that was getting closer to the truth. What if she's not really a new recruit? What if she's here for some other reason, like an undercover evaluation or something? The suggestion sent ripples of paranoia through the group. The idea that one of their fellow recruits might actually be an instructor or evaluator in disguise was deeply unsettling. It would mean that their every action and conversation had been under scrutiny without their knowledge. Sarah, meanwhile, was in her own quarters, fully aware that her cover story was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Each demonstration of her capabilities provided more evidence for anyone smart enough to piece together the clues. She had hoped to complete her assignment without drawing significant attention, but that plan was clearly no longer viable. Her actual mission at the training facility was highly classified and known only to a handful of senior Navy officials. She was conducting an undercover assessment of training protocols and security procedures, gathering information that would be used to improve programs for future special operations candidates. Her cover as a regular recruit had been carefully constructed to allow her to observe and evaluate without influencing normal operations. The assignment had seemed straightforward when it was first proposed. Her extensive Navy SEAL experience and training would allow her to blend in while conducting her evaluation, and her compact physical appearance would help her avoid standing out among the recruits. What the planners hadn't anticipated was how difficult it would be for someone with her a level of training to convincingly perform at a recruit level. Sarah's phone buzzed with an encrypted message from her handler confirming that her situation had been noted at higher levels and that contingency plans were being activated. The message was brief but clear. Maintain cover as long as possible, but be prepared for rapid extraction if the situation became untenable. The next morning brought new challenges as word of the previous day's sparring session had spread beyond the immediate training group. Other instructors and administrative personnel had heard about the recruit, who had effortlessly defeated a much larger opponent, and they were beginning to ask their own questions. Lieutenant Commander Patricia Hayes, the facility's executive officer, requested a private meeting with Rodriguez to discuss the unusual situation. Hayes was a by-the-book officer who took pride in maintaining proper procedures and protocols. The reports she was hearing suggested that something highly irregular was occurring at her facility. Chief, I'm getting reports about exceptional performance from one of your recruits that don't match her background records. Can you help me understand what's going on? Rodriguez chose his words carefully. Martinez has shown outstanding aptitude across all training categories, ma'am. Her performance has been remarkable, but I haven't identified any violations of regulations or procedures. Remarkable enough to suggest prior military experience that isn't reflected in her records. The question went to the heart of the matter, and Rodriguez realized that Hayes was conducting her own investigation into Sarah's background. Her techniques are certainly advanced for someone with her stated background, he admitted. Hayes leaned back in her chair, processing the implications. I've made some inquiries through proper channels, Chief. The responses I've received suggest that there are aspects of the situation that are above both our pay grades. But until I receive official guidance, I need you to monitor the situation closely and report any developments immediately. Conversation confirmed Rodriguez's suspicions that Sarah's presence at the facility was part of something larger and more complex than a simple training irregularity. The careful non-answers from his superior suggested that her real identity and mission were highly classified, but that knowledge didn't help him manage the growing suspicions among the recruit population. That afternoon's training exercise focused on small unit tactics and leadership development. Recruits were divided into teams and given scenarios that required them to work together to accomplish specific objectives. The exercise was designed to identify natural leaders and assess how individuals performed under stress while working with others. Sarah found herself assigned to a team with Jake, Tom, and 3 other recruits who had witnessed her previous demonstrations. The scenario involved navigating through a simulated enemy territory to reach a designated objective, requiring stealth, coordination, and tactical decision-making. As the exercise progressed, Sarah's teammates quickly realized that her understanding of tactics and procedure went far beyond what any civilian should possess. Her suggestions for movement patterns, communication protocols, and risk assessment were sophisticated and professional, indicating extensive training in military operations. Jake, who had begun to suspect the truth about Sarah's background, decided to test his theory directly. During a break in the exercise, he approached her with a specific question designed to reveal her level of knowledge. "What do you think about our approach to the ridgeline in terms of cover and concealment?" Sarah evaluated the terrain and provided a detailed tactical analysis that included considerations for fields of fire, escape routes, and potential ambush sites. Her response was comprehensive and professional, exactly what would be expected from an experienced special operations operator. The other team members exchanged glances as they realized that Sarah's knowledge was far too detailed and specific to be explained by civilian training or natural aptitude. They were working alongside someone whose expertise in military operations was extensive and professional. The breaking point came during a simulated emergency response drill the following week. The scenario involved a mock terrorist attack on the base, with recruits required to respond according to established security protocols while protecting civilian personnel. It was an advanced exercise normally reserved for later in the training program, but Lieutenant Commander Hayes had moved it up as a way to further evaluate the unusual dynamics in Rodriguez's training group. Sarah found herself in a leadership position when the senior recruit in her section panicked and froze during the initial moments of the exercise. Without hesitation, she took command of the situation, issuing clear, professional orders that demonstrated an intimate understanding of security procedures and tactical response protocols. "Chen, establish overwatch from that second-story window and report any movement in sectors 2 and 3. She directed with crisp authority. "Morrison, take Williams and secure the east entrance. Nobody gets through without proper identification and escort." Her teammates moved to comply without question, responding instinctively to the confidence and competence in her voice. But as they took their positions, they began to notice specific details about Sarah's commands that raised serious questions about her background. She was using military terminology and tactical concepts that weren't taught in basic recruit training. Her understanding of base security protocols was detailed and current, suggesting access to information that should have been restricted to permanent personnel. Most telling of all, she was issuing orders with the natural authority of someone accustomed to command in high-stress situations. Jake, positioned at the east entrance, realized that Sarah was implementing a textbook special operations response to a terrorist threat. Her tactics were sophisticated, coordinated, and effective. Exactly what would be expected from someone with extensive experience in counterterrorism operations. The exercise controllers observing from their command post were equally impressed and puzzled by Sarah's performance. Her response to the simulated threat was professional and appropriate, but it revealed a level of training and experience that shouldn't have been possible for someone with her stated background. Chief Rodriguez watched the exercise unfold with growing certainty about Sarah's true identity. The way she moved, communicated, and made tactical decisions under pressure were all consistent with advanced special operations training. She wasn't just performing well for a recruit. She was performing like a seasoned professional who had faced similar situations in the real world. When the exercise concluded, Sarah's team had achieved all their objectives with efficiency and precision that impressed even the veteran instructors. But her exceptional leadership had also made it impossible to maintain the fiction that she was an ordinary recruit with no military background. Lieutenant Commander Hayes called Rodriguez to her office immediately after the exercise, her expressions serious and concerned. "Chief, what we just observed goes well beyond exceptional aptitude. That recruit was operating with a level of tactical knowledge and leadership capability that indicates extensive special operations experience." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Yes, ma'am. I've been reaching the same conclusion for several days now. I've received some guidance from higher headquarters about this situation," Hayes continued. "Apparently, there are aspects of Martinez's presence here that involve classified operations. I'm not cleared for the details." but I've been instructed to facilitate a resolution. She handed Rodriguez a sealed envelope marked with high-level security classifications. You're to deliver this to Martinez immediately and ensure that she has privacy to respond appropriately. Whatever's going on here, it's about to be resolved at levels well above our authority. Rodriguez took the envelope and made his way to the recruit barracks. Finding Sarah in the common area, reviewing technical manuals with several other recruits, her dedication to maintaining her cover was impressive. But he suspected that she was as eager as everyone else to end the charade that had become increasingly difficult to sustain. Martinez. Report to my office immediately, he said, in a tone that indicated the seriousness of the summons. Sarah followed him without comment, maintaining her composed demeanor, despite knowing that the moment of truth had finally arrived. The other recruits watched her go with expressions of curiosity and concern, aware that something significant was about to happen. In Rodriguez's office, Sarah opened the sealed envelope and read the brief message inside. After a moment, she looked up at Rodriguez with an expression that was somehow both apologetic and relieved. Chief, I need to make a secure phone call. Is your office certified for classified communications? The question confirmed what Rodriguez had suspected for days. Sarah's casual familiarity with security procedures and classifications was not something that could be faked or learned through civilian channels. Rodriguez activated his secure communication system and stepped outside to give Sarah privacy for her call. 20 minutes later, she emerged from the office with a different bearing entirely. The careful composure she had maintained for weeks had been replaced by the confident posture of a professional military operator. Chief Rodriguez, she said, extending her hand in a gesture that was both formal and respectful. My name is Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, United States Navy SEALs. I've been conducting an undercover evaluation of training protocols and security procedures at this facility. Rodriguez shook her hand, finally able to acknowledge what he had suspected for days. I had figured it was something like that, Lieutenant. Your cover was good, but your skills were a little too polished for a civilian recruit. Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving at the facility. The mission planners underestimated how difficult it would be. For someone with my background to convincingly perform at a recruit level, every instinct I have has been telling me to excel, while my orders required me to blend in. So what happens now? Now, I complete my evaluation and submit my report. But first, I need to address the situation with the other recruits. They deserve to know that their suspicions were justified, and that this wasn't some kind of test of their loyalty or discretion. Rodriguez considered the implications of revealing Sarah's true identity to the recruit population. That's going to create quite a stir. Some of them have been developing some pretty elaborate theories about who you really are. I imagine so, Sarah replied. But they've handled this situation well, especially considering how confusing it must have been. Jake Morrison in particular showed real maturity in how he dealt with his initial assumptions and mistakes. An hour later, Sarah stood before the assembled recruit training group in their main classroom. Chief Rodriguez had called them together for what he described as an important briefing, but had provided no details about the topic. The recruits filed in with expressions ranging from curious to concerned, many of them expecting to hear about disciplinary action or administrative changes. Sarah stood at the front of the room in her recruit uniform, looking much the same as she had for the past 2 weeks, but somehow different in ways that were hard to define. Ladies and gentlemen, Rodriguez began, you're about to receive some information that will clarify the questions many of you have been asking about one of your fellow recruits. He nodded to Sarah, who stepped forward and faced the group with the confident bearing of a professional military officer. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority and competence that she had carefully suppressed for weeks. My real name is Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, and I'm a Navy SEAL conducting an undercover evaluation of this training facility. The silence in the classroom was absolute. 23 recruits sat frozen in their chairs, trying to process the revelation that had just turned their understanding of the past. 2 weeks completely upside down. The quiet woman they had dismissed, challenged, and eventually come to respect, was actually a Navy SEAL. One of the most elite warriors in the entire U.S. military, Jake felt his face flush with embarrassment as he remembered his condescending comments from that first night in the mess hall. He had questioned whether Sarah belonged in military life. While she had already achieved the highest levels of military excellence, the irony was so complete that he almost laughed, except that the shame of his initial behavior was too overwhelming. Derek sat in stunned silence, his hand unconsciously moving to rub his ribs, where he had hit the mat during their sparring session. He had been defeated by someone whose combat training was literally years ahead of anything he could have imagined. The casual ease with which she had handled his aggressive attack now made perfect sense. She had been restraining herself to avoid seriously injuring him. Tom Chen was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "You've been a SEAL this whole time? While we've been treating you like a fellow recruit," Sarah finished gently, "which is exactly what I needed you to do. My mission required me to observe normal training operations without influencing them through my presence. If you had known my real identity, everything would have been different." Lieutenant. Commander Hayes entered the classroom and took a position beside Chief Rodriguez. Her presence added an official weight to the proceedings and indicated that Sarah's revelation had been authorized at the highest levels of the facility's command structure. "Lieutenant Martinez has been conducting a classified evaluation of our training protocols," Hayes explained. "Her observations and recommendations will be used to improve the programs that future Navy personnel will experience. What you've witnessed over the past 2 weeks has been a professional military operator performing at the highest levels of competence." Marcus Williams raised his hand tentatively. "Ma'am, does this mean that our own performance has been under evaluation too?" Sarah answered before Hayes could respond. "Your individual performances haven't been my focus, but I have been observing group dynamics, leadership development, and how recruits respond to challenges and pressure. In that regard, this group has shown impressive qualities." She paused and looked directly at Jake, including the ability to recognize mistakes, learn from them, and show respect where it's deserved. That kind of personal growth and maturity is exactly what the Navy needs in its future leaders. Jake felt a mixture of relief and pride at her words. His initial behavior had been embarrassing, but his willingness to acknowledge his errors and change his attitude had apparently been noted and valued. Rodriguez stepped forward to address the practical implications of the revelation. "Lieutenant Martinez will be completing her evaluation over the next few days, after which she'll be returning to her regular SEAL duties. For the remainder of her time here, you'll treat her with the respect due to a commissioned officer, but she's requested that you continue to think of her as part of your training group." Derek finally found the courage to speak up. "Lieutenant, I owe you a massive apology. The way I challenged you, the things I said was completely out of line." Sarah's expression was understanding rather than judgmental. "You were frustrated and looking for explanations for something that didn't make sense to you. That's a natural human reaction. The important thing is how you handle new information when you receive it." Over the next hour, Sarah answered questions about her background, her SEAL training, and her experiences in special operations. She was careful to avoid classified information, but she provided enough detail to help the recruits understand the level of dedication and sacrifice required to reach the pinnacle of military service. "The obstacle course record I set," Sarah explained, "that wasn't me showing off. That was me performing at maybe 70% of my actual capability because I was trying not to make it too obvious that I wasn't a normal recruit." The revelation that she had been holding back significantly made her actual performance even more impressive. Several recruits began to understand that they had been in the presence of someone whose physical and mental capabilities were developed to an almost superhuman level. Tom Chen asked the question that many of them were thinking. "What's it like being a woman in the SEALs? I know it's only been possible for a few years." Sarah considered her response carefully. "It's challenging in ways that go beyond the physical demands, which are enormous for everyone, regardless of gender. You have to prove yourself constantly, and you can't afford to show any weakness or hesitation. But the men I've served with have been professional and supportive once they saw that I could meet the standards and contribute to mission success." Jake raised his hand. Ma'am, what advice would you give to someone who wants to try for special operations? First, understand that the physical requirements are just the beginning. Mental toughness, emotional resilience, and the ability to function as part of a team under extreme stress are more important than raw strength or speed. Second, be prepared to fail multiple times before you succeed. I didn't make it through SEAL training on my first attempt. The admission that even she had experienced failure, somehow reassuring to the recruits who were struggling with their own challenges and setbacks. As the briefing concluded, Hayes addressed the security implications of what they had learned. The details of Lieutenant Martinez's mission and identity are classified information. You're not to discuss any of this outside of your immediate training group. And even then, only when necessary for training purposes. Sarah stood up to leave, but paused at the door to address the group one final time. You're all here because you want to serve your country and be part of something bigger than yourselves. That desire, that commitment, is what makes someone ready for military service. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong here. But also, don't let success go to your head. There's always someone out there who's faster, stronger, or smarter than you are. She looked directly at Jake and Derek as she continued. The measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes, but whether they learn from them and become better. Based on what I've observed, this group has the potential to produce some outstanding naval officers and enlisted personnel. After Sarah left, the recruits sat in contemplative silence, processing everything they had learned. The woman they had underestimated, challenged, and eventually respected had turned out to be someone whose achievements placed her among the most elite warriors in the world. Jake was the first to speak, his voice filled with genuine admiration. I can't believe we were training alongside a Navy SEAL and didn't realize it. The stuff she did that seemed impossible for a recruit was actually her holding back. Derek nodded in agreement, his earlier hostility completely replaced by respect. That sparring session makes a lot more sense now. She could have seriously hurt me if she wanted to, but she just used enough force to end the confrontation. Safely, Tom Chen summed up what many of them were feeling. Feel like I just got a masterclass in what's possible if you're willing to put in the work and never give up. If someone like her can make it through SEAL training, then maybe some of us can achieve things we never thought possible. The revelation had transformed not just their understanding of Sarah, but their perspective on their own potential. They had witnessed excellence up close, learned from someone operating at the highest levels of military professionalism, and discovered that even the most extraordinary achievements were built on dedication, perseverance, and the willingness to never stop improving as they filed out of the classroom. Each recruit carried with them a new understanding of what military service could become. For those willing to pursue it with total commitment, Sarah Martinez had given them more than just an evaluation. She had provided them with inspiration and a standard of excellence to strive toward throughout their careers.